Lacy Fletcher could probably hear them packing for their New Year's trip. They're going to celebrate ringing in 2022 by going out of town and leaving Lacy to rot by herself. It's hard to say if Lacy felt relief in that moment knowing that they're going to be gone, or if she felt fear, because what if they don't leave her food? Would she just starve to death? What if they didn't leave her water? You can go longer without food but not water, right? Just a few days. What if they don't even come back? What would happen to her then? All she could really do in that moment is sit in that chair and watch them leave. I mean, what other choice does she have? She's trapped, unable to leave her prison, unable to see the sun. Lacy can't walk outside. She can't talk to her friends anymore, go to school. She's not even able to walk into the kitchen to grab food whenever her stomach rumbles. We don't know if she even knew what day it was, or if she could hear the New Year's Eve fireworks. Would she work it out from the fireworks that it's 2022 now? Or would the loud noises just terrify her? We don't know any of this for certain. We just know that Lacy Fletcher was a prisoner of the couch. She had been left there, hungry, covered in feces, naked, unable to eat unless one of them decided to bring her food. Her body was dying while she was still alive. There were parts of her flesh that were rotting. There were maggots crawling in and out of her hair, in and out of her bones, munching down at her dead flesh, and she's still alive. If she looked down, there would have been certain parts of her body where she could see straight through her skin, her tissue, her muscle, and see her bones. There were giant holes all over the lower half of her body. She was completely covered in feces. There was feces in her stomach, inside her stomach, in her mouth, and even her ears. She had been trapped on this couch for the past 12 years of her life. By the time that she was found, she had melted through the couch into a hole, and her skin was fusing with the brown leather. The only contents found in her stomach would be sofa cushion foam and feces. Did she eat it out of desperation? Was she fed it? We don't know. The worst part is, we're still unclear why any of this happened. There are theories that range from locked-in syndrome, where someone is fully conscious but unable to move their bodies, trapped inside their own minds. There are theories of full-blown torture, with Lacy being a victim for someone's sick, sadistic pleasure for over a decade. There are a lot of wild theories, but we have no definitive answers. All we know is Lacy Fletcher would die in one of the worst, slow, torturous deaths imaginable, and nobody helped her. And with that, let's get started. There's a very rare condition out there. It's called locked-in syndrome. Less than 1,000 people in the United States have it at any given point. Most sufferers are victims of a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. And even though it's a very, very rare condition, it seems to be a big fear for a ton of people. I mean, maybe it's the nature of the condition. Maybe it's because of the natural human fear of not being able to communicate with one another. It's terrifying. And it's exactly how you picture it. Locked-in syndrome. You're awake. Your mind is flowing. It's going 1,000,000 miles an hour. If you're lucky, you can open your eyes and look around. See what's around you. But really only as much as you can move your pupils. That's it. When you try to talk, nothing moves. You can't push out the words. It's like when you're in a dream and you're trying to scream for help, but no words come out and you start getting so flustered and frustrated with yourself, but you wake up and you realize that's just a nightmare. This is locked-in syndrome. You can't even move a single finger. You can't even swallow your own saliva. And soon drool is going to be seeping out of your mouth while doctors and loved ones look at you concerned, worried, because they don't know how this happened. You're trying to give them a sign of, hey, I can see you, I can hear you, I'm here. But there's nothing that you can move. Your body is locked, and you are locked in your brain. 90% of people die within the first 4 months that they're locked in. And a lot of doctors can figure out that they're locked in, but can't find a way to get them out. One survivor of locked-in syndrome stated, My cognitive capabilities were 100%. I could think and hear and listen to people, but I couldn't speak or move. The doctors would just stand there at the foot of my hospital bed and talk like I'm not in the room. And I just wanted to scream like, hey, people, I'm still here. But there was no way for me to let them know. He remembered hearing the doctors tell his family in the room that he had a 2% chance of survival. And even if he did survive, he would be completely comatose. He remembers hearing the conversation and seeing his wife break down and beg the doctors to not turn off his life support machines. And he was just screaming, no, I'm right here. Don't turn it off. I'm right here. But nobody could hear him. He couldn't move his lips. He couldn't move his mouth. Another survivor said, I could do nothing except listen, and I could only see the direct area in front of me based on how the nurses would position me in bed. So if they flipped me over to the left, I could only see that point of the room. He reported that he could feel every jolt and twinge of pain. He could even feel itchiness. You know, you have that itch in your back? He said it was miserable. He's in constant pain, but he's completely at the mercy of his doctors for pain meds. And this is a miserable way to live, but there's no choice. You don't have the choice of exiting your life or telling someone, hey, I can't do this. He said, I couldn't tell anyone if my mouth was dry, if I was hungry, if I had an itch that needed to be scratched. I felt disgusting all the time. I was constantly drenched in sweat. My skin was so sensitive to minor sensory changes, it felt like it was burning all the time. It felt like it was on fire. He was in constant pain. He was afraid of dying, and that's all he could think about all day. But worse than that, he was afraid of being trapped inside of his body forever. All he could do was talk to himself. He said he had to create another voice to talk to himself. 2 voices. He could calm himself down. He would say things like, how are you doing, Jake? Not too bad, just waiting on my meds. It's coming soon. Don't freak out, Jake. You're gonna be okay. When Jake wasn't talking to himself, he was talking to the nurses. They just didn't know it. They would ask him, hey, Jake, can you hear us? And he would be screaming at the top of his lungs, I can hear you. I'm right here. But nobody could hear him. And the highlights of his day was when nurses would come in and talk to him, even though they had no clue that he was, quote, in there. The ones who sang to him were his favorite. While they would flip him over, they would sing to him. But most of the days, he would just lay there in a completely empty room, unable to move. Sometimes his family and loved ones would come over into the hospital room and they would just scream at each other about what they were going to do with him, fighting about him as if he's not right there listening to all of this.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And there's no way of these people, there's no medical equipment that can detect that?
I think right now, eye fluttering is the quickest way that doctors will detect it. It still takes about a few days for them to even find out that you're locked in. Yeah, so most of these people, these survivors, they said it took multiple days for the doctors to be like, oh my gosh, I think he's blinking. Like, please blink twice if you can understand what I'm saying right now. I mean, I can only imagine there must be so many who couldn't control their eye movements either. So we don't know just how many of people have passed while they've been locked in. We're not sure. And once they're locked in, they remember everything. These survivors, they remember everything in detail and they were corroborating it with the nurses and doctors. So it's not just like hallucinations that they had. These are real events. They're completely conscious. There is a device right now, I think, that they're working on where it can try to communicate with you through your brain.
Listen, that's what I was thinking. Like, there's so many like brain scans. They can check like what area is moving and stuff.
I imagine it's very expensive. Right.
But
there was a man in France who wrote a whole book just by blinking one eye to someone who was transcribing it. And then he passed almost immediately after it was published. Jake said other times he was so bored, he would just count to 1,000 and then start all over again. 1 to 1,000. It was absolute hell. He felt like he was being tortured. He always wanted to know, what time is it? What day is it? How long has it been? But he can't even ask anyone. And then there's just so many depressing thoughts in his mind. There were days where all he thought about the entire day was his own funeral. Who's going to show up? What it's going to look like? Who's going to say what?